What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. A loaded episode for you this week. We are fresh off the Patriots' second OTA practice of this week. It was the first that was open to reporters, so we have a ton of notes to share, and we already shared a bunch on the Patriots Talk podcast, so go back and listen to that episode from Tuesday if you haven't already, but I will share some of my notes here specifically about the rookie class, about some of the newer players. That's what we're all about here on Next Pats. What is this team going to look like moving forward? Who are going to be the young and new players, especially, that are going to take this team to where it is going next? But we're also going to talk about some scheme and some of the interesting dynamics that I noticed from the coaching staff in that first open practice. We'll get another open practice next week. We'll have one more, and then we get to the mandatory portion of the calendar. This is all voluntary, let me remind you. The mandatory portion of the calendar, though, minicamp, Patriots minicamp, mandatory minicamp, is June 9th through 11th. So we'll have plenty more takeaways then, but I want to empty the notebook, so to speak, here today on Next Pats. We're also going to get to a tremendous interview with Cal head coach Justin Wilcox to talk about one of the most impressive rookies for the Patriots in this 2025 class to this point, and it's fourth-round pick Craig Woodson out of Cal. It's becoming DBU, as I told Justin Wilcox earlier today when we did our interview, because the number of guys that have been drafted into the league over the course of the last several years since 2020 is astounding. They know what they're doing when they get to the league, generally speaking. And so really fun look and a deep dive into the road that got Woodson to Cal, what allowed him to go from really a part-time player, somebody who endured the pandemic-shortened season, only 4 games for Cal that year, and then a season-ending injury in 2021. You know, you play 8 games and you don't rack up a ton of stats through your first 3 years as a college football player. Not a lot of guys who see the other side of that the way Craig Woodson did, but he did. Became a starter, never looked back. He ends up being, in my opinion, and we said it at the time, sort of a surprise pick in the 4th round. I just thought at other positions, you know, you might try to double dip at tackle, or maybe you're going for a tight end. There's a really deep class at tight end, or maybe you're going for, you know, a different style running back. You got sort of a sub back in the 2nd round, but it's so loaded there. Maybe you'd go somewhere else, some kind of corner maybe to give you a little bit of depth behind Christian Gonzalez, that guy over my right shoulder, and Carlton Davis. So there were a lot of ways that I thought at the time they could go, but based on everything that I've heard about Craig Woodson, we mentioned it on this podcast, we mentioned it on the Patriots Talk podcast when we were going through the schedule, our immediate reaction to the schedule's unveiling. You know, I said to Tom Curran, I said, hey, like, I've been asking around following Patriots rookie minicamp, who have been the most impressive guys? And the obvious name that came back to me was Will Campbell. They liked what they saw, just impressive physically, impressive in terms of his leadership, everything that they wanted through that rookie minicamp period. But the other name was Craig Woodson's. So, you know, a lot of draft picks between Campbell and Woodson. And so for Woodson to be the guy who's on the tips of tongues at one Patriot place, to me, was noteworthy. So we had to get his head coach from Cal on to tell us even a little bit more about him. And maybe it shouldn't be all that surprising that Woodson is already making an impact based on what we heard from Justin Wilcox. You really like that interview. But first, let's get to our takeaways from Patriots OTAs this week. Of course, when we're talking about young players, we're talking about takeaways from a practice. Let's start at the quarterback position, especially when the quarterback just so happens to give it to the defense on 4 separate occasions. Not what you're looking for. Not what you're looking for. I had it in the first 9 attempts in team periods for Drake Maye. He had 4 interceptions. But let me tell you why you don't need to get worried about Drake Maye's interceptions. Number one, let's look at the anatomy of the interceptions themselves. Not all interceptions are created equal. We know that. Drake Maye certainly had his fair share of ugly picks last year, but then there are others. I can think of Kayshon Boutte, for instance, over the middle of the field. You know, when you're batting it up to the defense and putting it on a silver platter for them, this is why we take a close look at every single play and we give you all the detail we can so that you have the proper context, so that you can refrain from, I would say in this instance, hitting that panic button. So, first interception, that was the bad one, in my opinion. Floated it over the head of C.J. Dupree, who's an undrafted tight end. Looks like a big physical, if he can figure it out in terms of understanding the scheme and knowing where to go. Looks like an athletic guy and looks like he's got a great frame. So maybe CJ Dupree is worth looking at a little bit more closely in one of our future Next Pats episodes. That being said, the pass in CJ Dupree's direction, not great from Drake Maye. Now, I think he might have felt a little bit of pressure on that one, and so maybe released it earlier than he wanted to, or released it while stepping up, put a little bit too much juice on it. Either way, not close to being completed, not close to its intended target. And who knows, maybe there's a little bit of a miscommunication between the undrafted rookie who's trying to figure out a new offense and the quarterback who's in his second year, but again, still trying to figure out a new offense. Either way, when it floats that highly over a receiver's head, over a pass catcher's head, I think for the most part, it's safe to look at the quarterback and wonder if anything different could have happened there. It was picked off by Del Pettis. The second interception, that was in the flat. Also, not particularly close to any Patriots receiver, but that one was so wonky that I do wonder, again, maybe this is on the quarterback. There's a lot on this guy's plate right now, and we'll get to that in just a second. But when you see nobody in the flat on a very short throw, looked like maybe 2 or 3 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, if that, it looked like Drake Maye was expecting someone to be there. It looked like it could have been Kyle Williams, the rookie third-round pick, who was the intended target sort of in the area. I saw some others say maybe they thought it was Pop Douglas. Honestly, folks, sometimes it's hard for us to tell. We don't have the perfect view of every single play, offensively or defensively, depending on where these guys are on the field. Obviously, there's no replay, so we're doing the best we can when it comes to intended targets, and things of that nature. Either way, I'm going to chalk that one up to a miscommunication and maybe even put it on the receiver, because both those guys are relatively young players themselves. If it was Mac Hollins, who had experience in this Josh McDaniels offense, and there's a miscommunication there, then maybe I would look at Drake Maye and say, my guess is Hollins kind of knows what he's supposed to be doing, maybe even more than you do, Drake Maye, so maybe you'd lean towards the quarterback in that situation. But clear miscommunication. I'm not necessarily putting that one 100% on Drake Maye. The third, to me, an excellent play by the guy over my right shoulder. If you're watching us on YouTube right now, Christian Gonzalez, where it looked like he was in zone. He actually acknowledged after the fact, he didn't use the word zone, but he said he was able to have his eyes on the quarterback. Typically that means you're in zone. And he was able to sort of peel off of his initial assignment and make a play deep down the field. Very nice catch. He's got great hands. The guy probably could play receiver if he really wanted to. But an excellent play by an excellent player is how I'm, breaking that one down. That's at least how I would headline it. Did Drake Maye need to take that chance down the field? It's practice. This is the time of year that you do that sort of stuff. But I'm giving Christian Gonzalez the check mark there as the guy who really created that play. And then the fourth interception, thrown into a little bit of traffic, thrown to a receiver who was getting, it looked like, kind of bear hugged, kind of mauled. And it looked like Hunter Henry just kind of threw his arm up almost in a frustrated sort of way, with the other arm kind of pinned down, it looked like. Drake Maye's immediately looking for a flag. I think Hunter Henry was looking for a flag. But when he kind of threw one hand at it and batted it, he batted it straight up, and Craig Woodson was able to dive in and catch the football before it hit the ground. So 4 picks. Not all bad decisions, I would say, by Drake Maye. Not all perfect decisions either. I would say one of them was clearly a bad ball. And again, maybe he would jump on the podcast. We could dial him up and bring him in here, and he'd say, now, actually, CJ was supposed to bend that route about 10 yards deeper than he actually did, so I was expecting him to be exactly in the spot where I threw it, and he wasn't. Just telling you what we saw. That to me looked like the one that you'd pin on the quarterback for sure. The others, I think there were some sort of mitigating circumstances when it comes to trying to place blame on the guy with the football in his hands at the quarterback position. So no need to panic. It is May 21st today. This practice occurred on May 20th. We have a couple more OTAs. As I mentioned, you've got all of mandatory minicamp. Then you start getting into training camp, and if this sort of thing is happening and there are these miscommunication moments and there are these spray miss moments where the quality of the miss is not what you're looking for as a young quarterback, then I think you do start to look at it and say, is this just who this guy is going to be? If not for his career, for another season, right? Because he did, let's be honest, he had those moments last year where he just floated it a little bit too high. Or, I know the interception against the Rams, at the end of that Rams game, I think it was Alex Van Pelt who kind of put the blame on Pop Douglas for not necessarily running the right depth on that route. Was it a great decision? I mean, who knows? Route gets run a little bit more differently, and maybe you have a little bit of a different result. So let's just keep it in perspective in terms of the time of year, the fact that not 100% of every interception is going to go to the quarterback, which I know you knew already, but it is just worth bringing that up because each of these plays from this OTA practice this week, I thought were created a little bit differently. I also would say this should be expected to some degree. This is a relatively complicated offense, at least it has been. And so what we know of Josh McDaniels is that he has traditionally put a lot on the quarterback. Now, will that change this year? We'll see. Apparently, over the course of the last 12 months, he's had an opportunity to go all sorts of different places and learn about how offense is being played in the NFL right now. And so maybe his philosophies have changed in some ways in terms of what he wants to put on the quarterback pre-snap, in terms of the language that he's using, in terms of some of these other maybe complicating factors that he has brought into his offensive huddle in years past. And maybe, just maybe, this year he has excised some of those in an effort to make it easier for a quarterback who's still 22 years old. He'll be 23. Drake Maye will be before the start of next season. So those things could happen. But what we know of Josh McDaniels' history is that offense puts a lot on the quarterback in terms of the pre-snap adjustments, in terms of pre-snap responsibilities, in terms of getting his offense into the right play at the right time. Are they doing all of those things? Is everything on his plate in late May here? My guess is probably not. But it also looks like, this is going to lead me into my next point here, that they're not holding back all that much either, just based on what we saw from this first practice. So when we see interception numbers, let's remember Drake Maye is a young player who's going through his second offensive change in as many years, and there are probably going to be some growing pains, especially as you're getting into your first competitive team periods of practice. And I would say they were competitive yesterday. We talked about that on the Patriots Talk podcast. The pace, the effort that was being expended, we're not really supposed to talk about who's starting, who's not starting, but let's just say this. A lot of regulars on regulars, a lot of names you would know going against a lot of names you would know, offense versus defense. And that to me is a good thing. That to me establishes what you're trying to be as a program if you're Mike Vrabel. And if life is a competition, as Mike Vrabel put it before practice yesterday, why wait? Why wait until training camp? Get it going now. You don't have pads on. It's not like everybody's tackling to the ground. It's not like, there's all that great of a threat of injury. You do have to try to take care of each other out there. There were a couple bodies that hit the ground yesterday that I'm sure Mike Vrabel was not all that psyched about. But enough of this, teaching camp stuff, which, Bill Belichick, it worked for Bill Belichick. It worked for a long time. Bill Belichick also coached at a time when the practice rules were much different. And yes, as the practice rules changed and things got dialed back in terms of what he was allowed to do, in terms of the intensity of practice and the frequency of practice, especially padded practice, by the time those rules changed, Tom Brady was pretty well into his run as greatest of all time. And so, you had a pretty significant runway taking you into that period where maybe you didn't need as much practice time as everybody else. But Brady leaves, practice time goes down. We see where the Patriots have been over the course of the last few years. It's not that hard to figure out. Listen, there are a ton of reasons for why that happened, but that's among them. And so if you're not using these spring practices as a means for creating competition and competing for jobs, and you're just biding your time to teach the fundamentals, which are great, and you've got to know them, but you've got to try to, in my opinion, cram in as much as humanly possible now so that you're more ready by the time you get to training camp, so that by the time training camp ends, you're not having to use that first month of the season as an extension of the preseason. Like, those days are over. You got to be ready to go. Tom Brady ain't here to turn a 2-2 football team into a 12-4 football team anymore. It doesn't work that way. So I know the Patriots looked ready to go in week 1 last year when they went to Cincinnati and won a football game, and that proved to be smoke and mirrors or a bit of a house of cards or a little bit misleading, perhaps. I do think, generally speaking, they had the right idea. You got to be ready to go week 1, and I think what we saw yesterday in terms of pace and effort is going to be a path toward that readiness. That, to me, was a good thing. Let's put the Drake Maye interceptions aside and talk a little bit more about, okay, why did Perry just say that it looked like they're kind of putting a lot on Drake Maye's plate already in terms of scheme? We saw a little bit of everything from Josh McDaniels in this practice. I'm talking run game. And again, no pads, so there wasn't even a whole lot of it. And yet we still saw power, counter, duo, inside zone, with tight ends shifting across the formation. We saw outside zone. We saw reverses. We saw fake reverses. We saw play action passes. We saw screens. We saw everything. Well, let me say almost everything. Obviously, in a couple of hours on a practice field in May, Josh McDaniels is not going to empty out his entire playbook. But the variety was there. And when you think about some of the things we saw last year where there was, and rightfully so much focus on trying to get the basics of this wide zone and everything that was going to be based off of it, all of those little details and those little nuances of that particular West Coast offense, this year you're seeing that McDaniels, I think, is going to be doing a potpourri of everything. Again, zone and gap schemes in the run game. You're going to see short stuff and deep stuff in the passing game. We didn't see any quarterback runs. We didn't see any RPOs, in my opinion. We saw under center and shotgun, though. We saw spread formations, empty formations with Travion Henderson flexed out wide, and we saw jumbo packages with extra offensive linemen on the field, 3 tight ends on the field at times. We saw 2 backs with a fullback on the field at times, with a tight end functioning as the fullback and then maybe flexing out into more of a traditional tight end alignment. So a lot of little wrinkles that you would think are maybe almost game plan specific that they would be working on in season. All right, Caden Wallace, come on, jump on the field here. You're our jumbo tight end now. You're our eligible receiver. They're even working on that sort of thing and the mechanics of that. So that to me was really interesting to watch, and it just tells you this train is moving. All right, get on board now. Show that you can keep up now, because if you can't, in my opinion, the weeding out process may start sooner than the team's first cut. Let's just say that. Whether a player is officially let go or not, in the coaching staff's eyes, if you're out by the time we get to early training camp and you're still not picking up on some of this stuff, and we saw some hiccups in terms of the operation yesterday. There were some points in time where people weren't sure, am I in or am I out on this one? Which group are we using here? There was a false start at one point, so it wasn't perfect. And again, you would expect it to be that way, in the same way that you'd expect Drake Maye not to be the perfect quarterback in this kind of offense in his first week of OTA practice, but variety is the spice of life, apparently, for Josh McDaniels and for his offense, because that's what we saw yesterday. Let's run through the draft picks really quickly. I'll just give you some quick observations, and then we'll get to our conversation with Justin Wilcox from Cal. Will Campbell, again, no pads for the offensive lineman, and yes, looks narrow-shouldered, and that was one of Tom Curran's primary takeaways yesterday when it came to Campbell in particular. To me, we kind of knew that. So what are we watching, in my opinion? Is he quick enough to be able to mirror these pass rushers? Is he powerful enough to, when they get their hands on him or he gets his hands on them, to either be able to survive the former or dominate when the latter occurs? And I thought he held his own. I really did, because it was a little bit more physical than we're used to seeing this time of year, even though no pads. He saw a lot of Keon White, who is, say what you will, and I'll be the foremost among them. Keon White will be the foremost among them. He hasn't really followed through on his draft status and his potential physically. The guy is a freak, athletically and with his frame. And he hasn't really given the Patriots that kind of production just yet. But to see Will Campbell hold up against a guy like that, long arms, powerful player, that to me, in one non-padded practice, that's a pretty good sign. So let's keep watching Will Campbell and how he performs against players like Keon White. Travian Henderson looks really quick. Saw him catch a very short sort of swing pass that was, I thought, out of reach for him, but was able to extend and bring it in. Looks very quick with the ball in his hands. They used him a few times on screens, and he's making people miss in small spaces. So, nice little practice from Travian Henderson. Kyle Williams, maybe a little bit more up and down. Again, I thought he was targeted actually on 2 of Drake Maye's interceptions. So was he there on that short throw where there was the miscommunication? He was the target deep down the field on the second Christian Gonzalez pick, I thought. And so, is there anything more he could have done? Could he have, played a little more defense? Again, I thought that was a great play by Gonzalez, but could he have done a little bit more to help his quarterback out there? I'm not sure, but the guy is fast for sure. He reeled in a nice corner route along the sideline. I'm really interested to see how he grows and develops this time of year because he clearly has speed. And to me, they're clearly going to use him on the outside. They need an X receiver. I don't think that's Stephon Diggs anymore. I don't think that's Kendrick Bourne. I don't think that's Pop Douglas. It could be Mac Hollins in certain spots. You think back to last year and Josh Allen, using Mac Hollins down the field as one of his go-to guys. Like, he could probably play that role, but I think even Mac Hollins, they might want tighter to the formation because one of his strengths as an offensive player, at least, is his ability to block. And so if you want to leverage that, you got to get him closer to the action. He could wipe out a corner on a pitch play, and that's all well and good. But you might want to use him as a Jacoby Myers type because that's what Josh McDaniels has liked to do with Myers, is use him to dig out a safety and mix it up sort of in the middle of the field there as a blocker. So be really interesting just to see how that group shakes out. Williams, to me, he's not the tallest guy, but in terms of his speed and his ability to separate at the line of scrimmage, I like his projection as an X, and I know the Patriots do too. In terms of other receivers, Diggs out, Hollins not participating there, but not participating. Polk, Baker, Pop, Douglas, Kayshon Boutte, Kendrick Bourne. Kendrick Bourne getting a lot of work. No surprise, good relationship there with Josh McDaniels, probably understands more than most at this point. Pop Douglas looks very quick, during individual periods, saw him make a move, sort of receivers on receivers, make a move to create some separation and got some oohs and ahs from his teammates there. Javon Baker, not great in some of the individual stuff. Saw him turn around late on a drill that looked like it was focused on sort of hitches and comebacks and working your way back to the football. A little late, had one clang off his hands early in the practice. Wasn't able to separate on another, again, on that same drill where it's sort of receiver on receiver. Efton Chisholm, I had him locked down as a defensive back. Again, short spaces and probably not even full effort, but like those are the things you notice when you're looking at guys that are, in my opinion, on the bubble or worse. In Javon Baker here, okay, what's his path to making this roster? You might need a couple injuries, but you need some good practices too. To his credit, overcame some of those not so great moments in like the skills specific portions of practice, and in an 11-on-11 period, working up against Christian Gonzalez, who was having a great practice, and Drake Maye hit him on a back shoulder throw for a nice long gain. He was able to kind of wrestle the football away, Baker was, on Gonzalez. So nice moment there for him. Jalen Polk, limited, dealing with, shoulder surgery that he had earlier this offseason. So took part in a fair amount of practice, but none of the competitive team stuff. Let's work our way down. Third rounder, Jared Wilson, didn't really participate. Doing a lot of conditioning stuff with Micah Wenu, with Morgan Moses. I would say all three of those guys extremely limited. Bordering on non-participants in practice. So how did the Patriots offensive line fill in with some of those guys not participating in the competitive parts of practice? Caden Wallace in at right tackle for Morgan Moses. Cole Strange in at right guard for Micah Wenu. Garrett Bradbury was at center, snapping to Drake Maye. And then it was Wes Schweitzer, the veteran utility man, interior guy, who was at left guard. And then you had Will Campbell at left tackle. So interesting group there. All things being equal, and before it started to be offense versus defense, Moses was out there at right tackle, Wenu was out there at right guard, Bradbury at center, Strange at left guard, and Campbell at left tackle. So Cole Strange, hey, not so fast, my friends. Anybody who thought Cole Strange might not be long for this roster, not so fast. not so fast. They've got him playing a lot of guard, at least in May. So take that for what it's worth. Craig Woodson, last but not least, we won't get all that deep into the day 3 picks. Josh Farmer wasn't out there. He was one of the few guys who wasn't there, along with Diggs, City So, and Ramondre Stevenson, who's still grieving the loss of his father. And Mike Vrabel, I thought, spoke eloquently on that in wanting to have Stevenson's back and talking about how Stevenson is going to have a big role with the Patriots this year. So we'll see on that front. Again, this part of the offseason is voluntary, so Stevenson taking the time that he needs to be able to, I know the team hopes, eventually come back and get back to work and get into this new offense. He does have a year of experience with Josh McDaniels, but sort of get back in the swing of things. You would think for mandatory minicamp in a few weeks here. Craig Woodson, out there early with the defense and out there early with Jalen Hawkins, his former Cal teammate. Really cool. Able to talk to Justin Wilcox about that as part of our interview. But it was Woodson who came up with one of those picks on that deflection from Hunter Henry, the 4th pick for Drake Maye. And just the fact that he's out there as early as he is. This is a day 3 pick, guys. I mean, this is a 4th round pick. This is not somebody that you're, and I'm not saying the team is banking on this, bringing him in and having him start right away. But with Jabril Peppers somewhat limited, Kyle Duggar somewhat limited, those guys were there, but they didn't partake in the 11-on-11 stuff. You had Jalen Hawkins and Craig Woodson out there playing the safety spots. And guy who spent 6 years in college, guy who did a little bit of everything, a guy who's renowned for having a really excellent football IQ and communication skills. It says a lot that they're willing to put him out there at that point in practice, running around with people like Hunter Henry. You can't just have anybody out there. You got to understand that guy's going to know what he's doing and understand the situation and not hurt anyone out there. That's sort of at a fundamental level, but that he's going to be able to be organized and help his teammates, his veteran teammates who've played a lot of NFL football, get organized at that safety spot. So just interesting to see him out there as early as he was out there for this OTA practice. Again, he was very impressive at rookie minicamp as well, as my understanding. And so things just continue to trend upward for Craig Woodson, the 4th round pick out of Cal. Again, for more news and notes from that second OTA practice, it was our first for reporters that we were able to see. Go check out the last episode of the Patriots Talk podcast. Love getting into this stuff. Again, we'll have more takeaways next week following another OTA practice that we'll be able to sit there and watch and go through the whole thing, and we'll be able to share with you as much as we can. But before we get to that, before we start talking about next week, let's talk about this week. Great conversation we have with Cal head coach Justin Wilcox. He's going to tell us all about Craig Woodson. Enjoy. Very excited now to welcome into the Next Pats podcast, Justin Wilcox, head coach of the Cal Bears. Justin, thanks so much for being with us here on the podcast. Really excited to talk some Craig Woodson today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this is a fun time of year because we're all, as media people covering the Patriots, covering any NFL team really, starting to get to know these players that are just joining these teams, free agents, but rookies especially now. And one of the names that has stood out to me in the conversations, Justin, that I've had with people in the organization just through rookie minicamp and just through a few OTAs is Craig Woodson's 4th round pick, but he's been among, it sounds like, their most impressive rookies. I wanted to ask you first, what did you think of the fit when you heard that Craig was drafted? He was their first pick on day 3 in the 4th round. What did you make of that fit with Mike Vrabel being here in New England and Craig coming to Foxborough?
Well, we think really, really highly of Craig. He's been an unbelievable teammate when he was here. Loved coaching that guy. So I was excited for him. Everybody here was excited for him. I mean, if you just walk around our building, everybody thinks very, very highly of Craig. And so we were really excited for him. And, I know he, in his mind, this is just the start. Some guys, I think, sometimes view the draft as the culmination. And I know the way Craig thinks is this is just the beginning for him. And I'm sure he's out to prove himself again. That's how he really approaches everything, is each and every day the guy is trying to prove something. And so really excited for him. I'm really proud of him, and we miss him around here, but really, really looking forward to watching him develop as a pro football player.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Justin, because just reading a little bit about Craig's road and how he even started with you guys at Cal was, it sounds like as a high school player, I know he was at Texas and had a good high school career in Texas, but it wasn't like he was, a 5-star recruit. I think he was a 3-star recruit. And so it wasn't like he was necessarily getting looked at by all the biggest programs in the country. I think I saw Bucknell, maybe UTSA, I think maybe had an offer to him. And then you guys swooped in and he was able to make his way out west to you. What did you see in him then that made you want to give him a chance with your program?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. He wasn't the 5-star recruit that had offers from every, power football program in the country. In recruiting, there's a lot of projection in recruiting most of the time. And so, there was some qualities, the way that the coaches talked about him, obviously the things you saw on tape, and ultimately, the magic is the individual and how they adapt to college and how serious they are about football and their preparation, and they're working on their craft. There's a lot of talented guys out there, but not everybody puts in the same amount of time. And I know Craig, and knowing him for 6 years now, I mean, the guy is extremely serious about football. He makes decisions 24 hours a day on what's best for his football career. He's been like that since he's been here. He's extremely coachable, and he improved each and every year he was here. And I think that's ultimately why he ended up getting drafted and now has an opportunity to embark upon a pro football career. But a very, very coachable guy, very serious about the game, and he has traits. He's a good athlete. He plays the ball very, very well. I remember his freshman year here when he first got to fall camp. I mean, it was like every day he was making a play on a ball. And so really excited for him, like I said, and looking forward to watching him grow as a professional.
It's interesting you mentioned those sort of that immediate impact on the practice field that he seemed to make as a freshman. It looks like just looking at his career at Cal, it did take him a few years before he became really a regular contributor, and some of that was out of his hands, right? So I have it, freshman year, 4 games, sophomore year is 2020, so it's pandemic impacted, not a lot of football being played, and then he suffered a knee injury that wiped out his 2021. You mentioned just how serious he is about the game and about his role with the team. Maybe if you could, can you think back to that time, any time in those 3 years where you looked at him and he was sort of, maybe toiling kind of under the radar, so to speak, or to a degree, that led to the significant improvement or led to him seizing the role that he ultimately sees because he became a starter in 2022 and never looked back and started a ton of games for you guys?
Yeah, we felt really good about him even early in his career. His freshman year, he was playing special teams, but at that time we had some very, very good defensive backs playing for us, a number of which are still playing in the NFL. And I think one of the things that really benefited Craig is he sat in a defensive back room with multiple guys that are playing in the NFL, and he saw how they approached it, from Bynum and Hicks, and I think Jayhawk and Ashton were still here at that time, and Daniel Scott, who was a draft pick of the Colts. I mean, he just saw a number of guys and how they approached the game. And Craig, as I mentioned, I keep saying this, he's very serious about football. I mean, he obviously is a good athlete, but he really took to the training and meetings and walkthroughs and practice. He wanted to become an expert at playing DB. So he started out, played special teams. And then we had the shortened season. Then he did have an injury, which caused him to miss a year. But even early in his career, we felt really good about his potential. Now, you never really know. I mean, these guys, a lot changes between 18 years old and 22, 23 years old. But he really never flinched in terms of his approach to the game, how he worked on football, how serious he was about it on and off the field. And so when you take a good athlete who has that mentality, who has seen guys ahead of him, who set a great example on what it takes to be a professional, it's a really good recipe. And so he followed it, and he was a great teammate here, and we miss him, like I said, but I'm not surprised by any means that Craig has got himself to this point. And as I mentioned before, I mean, this for him is just the beginning of another chapter, and it's not necessarily just the only goal that he's made it to that point. It's now, how long can he play and how well can he play? And I know he approaches it that way.
We mentioned some of those names that were in the DB rooms with Craig. You guys, you're like DBU there at Cal. Just rattling them off. You had 3 draft picks this year: Noel Williams, Craig Woodson, Marcus Harris. Patrick McMorris was drafted last year. Daniel Scott, you mentioned, Elijah Hicks, Cam Bynum, Jalen Hawkins, and Ashton Davis. What do you got in the water out there at Cal, Justin? That's what is it that you guys are coaching? Is that it, in some ways maybe the secret sauce that's leading the league to be so interested in your guys at the safety and cornerback positions?
Well, we have conviction in what we're doing and how we're coaching it, but the most important part is the players. I mean, all those guys, they share some of the same traits, not athletic traits, because you have to be a talented player to get an opportunity to play in the NFL. But it's the preparation, the work ethic, how serious they are about football, the meetings, the walkthroughs, the off-season conditioning and training. They're always, looking to get their PhD in playing defensive back, and those guys bought into that. And it's you don't always see that. So the magic is in the individuals and the players. And we have, like I said, we have conviction in what we're coaching and how we're coaching it. But those guys are special, and it's not a real complicated formula in what we ask them to do. However, it is hard. I mean, it's hard to do it every single day for 4 and 5 years to put themselves in a position to go, embark on a professional career. But, it's the character traits as much as anything that they share. And then when one guy does it and has success, and then the younger guys in the room see that, then, that kind of feeds on itself. And so we've been able to take advantage of that. And hopefully they've been able to take advantage of it as well.
Well, it was really cool. Yesterday, we're out at, it's the voluntary portion of the calendar, the NFL calendar, and we're out at the team's second OTA practice yesterday. And with the starting defense at safety are Craig Woodson and Jalen Hawkins. And that's pretty cool. See a couple teammates, former Cal teammates there. I think Jalen was a senior maybe when Craig was a freshman, and he talked about right after being drafted about, how, like you said, he used to watch that guy and just try to do everything he did. And obviously it paid some dividends. Justin, I wanted to ask you what you thought. Craig actually ended up making an interception off of Drake Maye yesterday. Ball was deflected. He's diving in. He's making a play, sort of at the linebacker level. Almost. I know he did a little bit of everything for you guys. It sounds like he was sort of the voice of the defense and, was able to play a lot of different types of safety roles for you at Cal. What was his greatest on-the-field strength? You mentioned he's really serious about what he does, but in terms of stuff that he does on the field and did on the field for your football team, what do you think is his greatest attribute?
That's a really good question, but to me, the thing that Craig did the best was he was versatile. He played the deep part of the field in a half or a post, and he did that effectively. He could track the ball when it was in the air. He played run fits into the box in 3 deep really well. I thought he had good instincts in the run game. He was a physical player. He was a good tackler. He had good cover skills for a safety. So I thought he did a lot of things well. And he was also a guy that you put him on punt team, you put him on kickoff, he was going to show up. He just did everything really well. And he did it every day. I mean, the guy never missed practice. He was the first guy out there. Again, and just like Jayhawk, who you mentioned, they had the same traits. I mean, those guys didn't miss practice. They weren't late to meetings. They were early. I mean, every little thing mattered to them, and that showed up. But I think when you look at the actual football on the field, the thing that stands out to me about Craig is just the versatility, and he did so many things well and just did not make too many mistakes. He was very well prepared, and as I said, he was a good tackler. Played the ball when it was in the air. He had good cover skills. He fit the runs really well. He was instinctive in the run game. He was we used him as a blitzer at times, so I thought he did a lot of low zones, deep zones. He just did a lot of things well.
It's funny, I'm listening to you speak, and I'm thinking back to a play that actually Craig described for us soon after he was drafted. He was sort of asked to maybe describe a play that kind of defined who he was as a player. And he talked about a 3rd and 6 against Pitt and just coming down and really making like a bone-rattling kind of hit to force a 4th down and a punt, and, just taking a lot of pride in that. It wasn't a pick. It wasn't, a play that might show up necessarily in the box score, but obviously an impactful play. Whether it's that play or another, Justin, this is the last thing I wanted to ask you. Is there a moment on the field moment that you will think back to, and as safeties come in, if Craig ends up having a good career here in New England, you can point to him and say, hey, I remember when he did this here, and that's sort of what we're looking for in our safeties, guys that play that position. Is there a moment like that stands out in your mind about Craig?
Man, I could pick a lot of plays that he's made. He's made a lot of impactful plays throughout his time here. I think the thing about Craig is he is such a steady person, and that shows up in his football. As I mentioned before, there was never, in 6 years, I don't ever remember him having an issue with, he was late to a workout, or he missed a meal, or he wasn't. He was a total professional the whole time. And you mentioned the play this year against Pitt, and I think it's a great example. Yeah, it wasn't the interception, and he had interceptions when he was here. He had big hits. He had pass breakups, but I remember the play. It was a critical 3rd down in a I think it was a 1-score game. It was like 17-15 or something. We had to get him off the field. They have a cut split by the X receiver, or all condensed, and it was a mesh alert, and we were playing like a robber coverage, and he saw it pre-snap because he was prepared. He wasn't trying to make the decision after the ball was snapped, so he was prepared. The ball gets snapped. Here comes the shallow. I think might have even been completed, but he hit the guy, knocked him backwards. They have to punt. We get the ball. We have a chance to go win the game. And so those are the types of plays that win and lose football games. And the reason he was prepared for it is because all the work he did prior to that moment. And that's what football is at a high level. And that's why I believe in that guy so much. And I know it's obviously a challenging league, and there's going to be tough matchups, but I know that guy's going to be prepared. He's going to do everything he possibly can to be ready. He's going to be accountable on and off the field. So I think I could, just piggyback his comment there on a play that maybe didn't show up huge in the box score, but is a really impactful play in a game.
Well, we're excited to get to know him a little bit better as he spends time here in New England. Justin, I know the team's already excited to have him, and they're excited by what they've seen from him in just a short period of time with him since he's been drafted. But it's been great to get to know him a little bit better by having this conversation with you here today. So thanks so much for sharing some time with us. I know it's busy. I know you're in the middle of recruiting, and there's a lot going on right now for you and your program. So we really appreciate it, Justin. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, that's it for this edition of the Next Pats podcast. Thanks so much to Justin Wilcox. Thanks so much to John the Skull Crusher Henry, for our entire team here at the BMC, the Boston Media Center, NBC Sports Boston, our great home here in Needham, Massachusetts. We have so many people working on this pod to make it as digestible and as entertaining and as well produced as humanly possible for you. For you. We do this for you, people. Okay, so if you could, please subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, leave us a comment, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. If you could, we're going to start mixing it up again in the comment section. I know it's the off season, but boy, oh boy, are you guys busy in the comment section, and we love it, and we love you for it. So keep it up. I'll get in there myself. We'll talk to you there, and we'll talk to you right here on Next Pats next week. We'll talk to you then.